Are we going to hit recession or not? And what does the trade war mean for America? Here's Warren Buffett's take on trade.
Trade can be an act of war, and I think it's led to bad things. Just the attitudes it's brought out in the United States. I mean, we should be looking to trade with the rest of the world, and we should do what we do best, and they should do what they do best. And I don't think it...
Now, Buffett goes on to say more, but first, I think we should analyze what's currently going on in the economy, what's this jobs data that we just got on Friday, and how does it impact the odds of a recession going forward? And then let's have a little bit more of a chat about what Warren Buffett says about trade, keeping in mind that as trade is considered, or can be considered, a trade war, that is, can be considered an act of war, it's worth remembering that not only did Warren Buffett just say this, but Jamie Dimon in his letter to shareholders said exactly the same thing. Marjorie Taylor Greene, after all, is freaking out that Donald Trump is potentially risking war with Iran, which is sort of a flip given that she usually defends everything that Trump does. And at the same time, you have a lot of talk over a potential increased impetus for China to invade Taiwan because of tariff warfare. So when both Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon, CEO of the largest bank in the world, are telling us tariffs could be an act of war, maybe we ought to pay attention. But it's worth knowing that so far, the unemployment data that we've been getting has been pretty dang decent. I mean, Barclays put it together very well. They said the Fed's going to sit on the sidelines because jobs data remains solid. The household survey indicates no fallout yet. U6 unemployment nudged lower, and maybe we'll get a mild recession in the second half of 2025, topping out unemployment around 4.7%. Now, interesting because Barclays, while they call for a recession, they call for a mild recession, with the acknowledgement that a more forceful recession could end up leading to an increase in these jobless numbers. So it seems like even Barclays, in talking about sort of this positive jobs data, suggest, hold your horses. It might be too soon to celebrate, saying that April's jobs data, which was collected in the earlier portion of the month of April, where we still didn't have full clarity on tariffs and kind of still don't today, might not be the best tell for what could happen in the economy. Now, what's interesting also is there's a lot of talk about the birth-death model. I'll quickly just make a mention on this because some people mention there's this huge adjustment on the birth-death model that led to 393,000 more jobs. You can see this in the actual tables on the birth-death model, not seasonally adjusted. And it's not unusual to see these sort of numbers in adjustments. Obviously, any kind of adjustments are always going to raise political questions, but I don't really see a difference in the size of adjustments between those under the Biden administration and the Trump administration. So I'm just going to sort of ignore that and say, hey, the BLS is usually always late, but I don't really see the political bias in it just yet. It could show up later, but I don't see it yet. Now, so Barclays is saying second half, that it's too early to take this positive jobs data in the face of tariffs to say recession risks are off the table. The place where recession risks do seem to be off the table, though, are Europe. In the European Union, you have this idea that in the recession probability model put together by Rabobank, the current near-term recession risk is close to the lowest point we've seen since March of 2022, and the forward-looking components indicate only a slight increase in the chance of a recession solely because of tariffs. That's very different, though, in the United States. See, Rabobank goes on to say that the impact of tariffs in the United States are stagflationary because of the negative supply shock from having to find different suppliers, relocating production, and all of this takes time. And while in the near term, it's going to impact prices in a way we're not entirely sure yet exactly what's going to happen with which products, where we're going to see shortages, all this TBD. But their belief, based on the models they're running for the United States, is that their models forecast negative GDP growth in the third quarter of 2025 in all scenarios, and a technical recession in 5 out of 7 of their recession models. Now, they acknowledge that they're not sure if that's actually going to turn into a quote-unquote real recession because the National Bureau of Economic Research has sort of their own, not necessarily clear definitions for what a recession actually is. But on a technical basis, so 2 quarters in a row of negative GDP and an increase in unemployment, they do expect will happen with a greater than 50% chance. In fact, 5 out of 7%, odds chance here essentially. So what's fascinating here with Rabobank and Barclays is both of them are telling us that the damage of tariffs, don't look for it now. In fact, a lot of good is coming from tariffs in the near term in data because you're seeing this substantial pull forward of demand that's showing up now in Q1 earnings. Okay, that makes a lot of logical sense, but it does kick the can of risk down into the third quarter and the fourth quarter, as in the second half of this year. Now, my hope is that if we do end up having some form of recession, that it's over and done with by 2027. That's my personal goal. Those are the models that we're sort of using internally to base our investment decisions on. In other words, hey, if the recession comes and it's over quickly, great, we can deploy capital more quickly. But if the recession lasts longer, we want to be prepared for that scenario as well. And I think as an investor, it's worth considering those various scenarios. Hey, what am I going to do if we have a shallow recession later this year? What's going to happen if I lose my job? What happens if the recession lasts 2 years? What opportunities can we take advantage of? And I actually see that as a hopeful opportunity. Much like when Warren Buffett today at the shareholder meeting talked about, hey, opportunities don't come to you every day. They come all of a sudden out of nowhere. They don't really come in an even pace. And so you want to be prepared for those opportunities. And the best call option, he says, with no expiration date and no premium, basically, no strike price, and the best call option on every asset class possible is cash. That's personally why we're hoarding cash. I mean, that's what we're doing at HouseHack. That's what I've been talking about since July of last year. And frankly, when you look at the data, the unemployment data, you can actually see that labor data was worse July of last year. See this hole right here where my mouse is? This is unemployment data, or employment data rather, going all the way back to May of 2021. And you can see how we sort of stagnated over here. Some would call it normalized. 187 might be normalized, so you could call this normalized over here. But July was looking pretty gnarly over here because we were really plummeting in terms of that jobs data. Now, of course, we got the, some people don't like this phrase, but the quote unquote Trump bump or whatever over deregulation, the hope for tax cuts, the hope for some form of invigoration of the U.S. economy under the MAGA movement. That maybe led to some of these job gains right here. So, of course, the question now is, are tariffs going to create jobs or are they going to damage jobs? Well, this is where we say we won't know until the second half of the year. So either way, again, HouseHack, we're fundraising, by the way, over at househack.com if you want to learn more about it. To me, I see cash as a great opportunity. This, I think, is why Warren Buffett has one of the greatest cash piles. And it's not necessarily cash because he invests in short-term, treasury-like instruments. So do we. So that way you're picking up that yield in the meantime, but it gives you an opportunity. And I think that's exactly what everybody should sort of be preparing for, is either diversify into something that's giving you cash flow, like a yield with maybe upside, like I was like, or, something that makes you comfortable, that gives you yield and gives you opportunity. So I think that's interesting in the face of probably most of the damage coming in the second half of this year. Now, we'll see. A lot of this is going to come down to what happens with the Chinese trade and the potential for, people actually going to selling stocks in the face of either job loss or some form of real uncertainty. Like Buffett says, what we've seen in the last few weeks is nothing unusual in the stock market, and he's totally right. We haven't actually seen any true panic. In fact, if you look at cumulative flows into U.S. equity since 2020, as Bank of America, quote unquote, says here, no sign of selling for U.S. stocks, both by U.S. Domiciled and non-U.S. domiciled. In other words, the world really isn't panicking yet. Now, that doesn't necessarily say they will with certainty, but they certainly could. We're just not at that level at this point. And I think that's why Buffett's like, no, we're not there yet. Now, another thing you could see is that oil is starting to discount the potential for a recession. Oil usually falls in recessionary shocks, just like it does over here, or did rather, in the dot-com bubble, just like it did in the global financial crisis, the great financial crisis, just like it did during COVID. This is very, very normal to see a recessionary environment be sort of pre-discounted by the oil market. Now, that said, where do we actually sit when it comes to trade negotiations, and what kind of hope should we have? Well, there is hope that maybe some form of a trade deal will be arrived with China, but so far, China is kind of digging in a little bit here. As you can see, China's Ministry of Commerce says the U.S. has recently reached out through relevant channels multiple times, expressing a desire to engage in talks with China over tariff issues. However, any potential dialogues are going to come down to the U.S. rectifying their erroneous unilateral tariff measures, saying one thing while doing another, or even attempting to use talks as a cover for coercion and blackmail will not work with China. In other words, Donald Trump says, hey, we're talking to China. China's like, yeah, you reached out to some of our trade reps, but let's be real, we're not going to talk to you until you remove tariffs. And then Donald Trump also makes it clear that, hey, tariffs on China might go down, but they're not going to go to zero. This still puts us a little bit in a standstill environment. Now, over the last few days here, about the last 48 hours, we have seen China super quietly start exempting some goods from their tariffs. Probably because they are starting to feel the damage. Of course, both sides are going to get hurt here, right? Like nobody's saying that either side is immune. And there's some hope that China's, security czar for Xi Jinping has reached out and basically, publicly said, hey, what can China do to help with the fentanyl situation? Keep this in mind, this gets a little complicated. China manufactures a lot of the precursor chemicals or ingredients for making fentanyl. But, those ingredients themselves aren't illegal. They just get bought by people who use those ingredients for illegal purposes. It's kind of like, imagine you manufactured, I'm just going to use this as a random example, okay? Clorox. And Clorox was the ingredient in a very, very expensive illegal drug. And you were a Clorox seller. It's like, okay, well, does Clorox get in trouble? Should Clorox shut down? Should you stop making Clorox? Should we try to use something else? Who's going to pay for that transition? Or should we focus on the criminals who are actually taking Clorox and doing bad things with it, right? Just as an example, right? And I'm by no means implying that Clorox is used for what I mean, theoretically, there's chlorine that, you could do some crazy things with that, but you could do that with pool supplies as well. Again, this is just an example. So the point here is China is starting to kind of open little doors for negotiations, which is positive. And hopefully these resolve because it so far, at least according to Foreign Affairs, seems like the Trump administration has somewhat underestimated China's willingness to kind of be silent and stubborn. I think a lot of people, including the Trump administration, per Foreign Affairs here, thought that China was going to roll a lot quicker on this tariff war. And so far they're digging in because, well, as a lot of people say, China's been preparing for this for 4 years or more since basically the last trade war, which started about, 6.5 years ago. So it makes sense. Now, China's got something else that's really interesting and sort of different from America, is that the median survival rate of businesses in China is only 3.7 years for small to medium businesses, whereas in America, it's over 8 years. Now, that's really interesting because it kind of shows China's method is more like, look, we're going to do whatever we can to undercut manufacturing, even if it destroys our own businesses. We are going to grow at all costs. And unfortunately, that creates a little bit more of a revolving door for businesses in China, but it expands China's ability to export and continue to reduce prices. There's no sort of moat, if you will. Prices just keep going down. And unless you can keep innovating, you have the money to keep innovating, well, you're going to get out-innovated by the next business that pops up. Now, of course, there are also concerns that, hey, ports are going to start slowing down. I think there was a great video by F-Stoppers where they were talking about ordering lids, bottles, and boxes for their sauce or whatever that they order for China. And it takes forever for them to get these products because they have to be manufactured. And once they're manufactured, it takes another, 6 to 12 weeks to get their shipments to show up. And now tariffs are actually starting to hit now, over the next 10 days here. So currently we still have inventory and stores and products, things are available. But soon, we're going to run out of inventory that is untariffed for toys or furniture or whatever. And often, a lot of people are like, oh, well, just pay the 10% cost. But the problem is, 10+% tariff. The problem is this 10% tariff or whatever it is, it could represent as much as 60 to 80, sometimes even 100% of a business's profit margins. And so if your business's profit margin goes, let's say, from 10% to zero, essentially, well, it's a little bit of a poopy-doopy. You might not actually want to be in business anymore. I thought or you just physically can't be in business anymore, which is unfortunate. That's worst case scenario. Now, I thought some of the comments were really interesting on the F-Stoppers piece. Here's an Australian who says, hey, we're basically your former allies now. Here's a licensed custom broker talking about being involved in the supply chain for 38 years, and there's a tidal wave coming, and everybody is on the beach and can't see it. Then he goes on to sort of pitch his own business. Here's somebody else, also from Australia, suggesting it's not hard to despise Americans right now. Here's somebody who's talking about the 60% problem. I've seen this 60% argument a lot. It can be less, it can be more. It depends on the business. Some businesses say we're just not profitable at all. Some businesses say, a 10% tariff on our revenue is really just on the sort of like the not on the top line revenue. It's actually just 10% on the COGS side, right? So if a business has a 10% profit margin all the way, so they sell stuff for $100 and they get $10 at the end. Well, if they sell stuff for $100, it probably only costs them $50 to make it, right? So 10% on that $50 might be $5, but there you go. That's 50% of the net all the way at the bottom. Anyway, quick examples that don't really matter. So just, again, more for context. So when we put all of this together, nobody really knows, but it seems like a lot of institutions are in agreement that if tariffs continue to stay in this level of an uncertain range, we're probably looking at a recession in the second half. Now, I think it's actually a great opportunity, and I've just been maintaining for people who watch my YouTube channel or otherwise. Hey, if you have cash, you have options, or at least cash flow from something that's yielding you some form of a yield, whether you're into treasuries or the house hack 5% plus the upside in the stock, whatever. You already know about that. Read that at househack.com. But what I really think is interesting is Buffett's bluntness here, because he makes it clear that, we are better off when the entire world prospers. That's how he ends this discussion. And I couldn't agree with him more, that I actually think more trade and more capitalism that spreads throughout the world just makes everybody richer. And I love his point of view where, and you'll see it in just a moment, where he says, we don't need to be against 7.5 billion people in the world where we're the 300 million going, haha, we won. That's not a good way to make friends. That's not a good way to promote humanity. Anyway, let's listen to Buffett a little bit more.
That's what we did originally. I mean, we were good at producing tobacco and cotton 250 years ago, and we traded it. And we want a prosperous world with 8 countries with nuclear weapons, including a few that are what I would call quite unstable. I do not think it's a great idea to try and design a world where a few countries say, ha, 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 we've won, and other countries are envious. So my import certificate idea, which went no place, I think we've got extra copies, Rob. We've not a great demand for the copies. If anybody did, and if you'd like, and write the office, I think we could probably send you a copy of it. But the main thing to do is not use trade should not be a weapon. And the United States, we've won. I mean, we have become an incredibly important country, starting from nothing. 250 years ago, there's nothing been anything like it.
And a lot of that built on the backs of other countries, because they have enabled our expansion from a manufacturing industry to one of a service-based industry, which is really one that's substantially richer than a manufacturing-based industry. I think, obviously per capita GDP is substantially higher in the United States, in part because of the trade that we've been able to do with other countries who have enabled us to purchase, cheap mugs or cheap products for our businesses, or cheap advertising or cheap print, whatever it is, cheap computers, machinery, you name it, which is a good thing. It seems to make the entire world expand and the entire world richer. So I've maintained from day one that I think tariffs are a stupid idea, and I will maintain that view because I view what is, from an economic lens, the most logical for the world. And so I couldn't agree more with Warren Buffett here. And, I'll continue to argue against tariffs But again, it is what it is. There is a very large sort of MAGA, Make America Great Again base that believes that the best thing to do is sort of reindustrialize the United States. And of course, to some extent, it makes sense to industrialize the United States where it's important, whether it's, certain types of critical defense infrastructure, making bombs or weapons or munitions or whatever, which we have some of the best defense contractors in the world. To also ensuring that we have some access to manufacturing our own critical chips, which, even the Biden administration supported via the CHIPS Act. Of course, Lutnick says Donald Trump is going to 10x or 20x that sort of investment. Great. Let's hopefully see that play out. But I'm a big fan of TSMC building some of these advanced chips in America, because if China does invade Taiwan, well, we don't want to be left without the ability to manufacture critical chips that could be components inside of the weapons that we use. We don't want to lose that supply chain. But this idea that, everything like iPhone should be made in America is probably not going to happen. And I think that's exactly why companies like Apple have already announced that they're going to now move more manufacturing to India rather than China to sort of escape this sort of fentanyl war and just go where the cost is still cheap, even with, an addition of 10%. Anyway.
And it's a big mistake, in my view, when you have 7.5 billion people that don't like you very well, and you got 300 million that are crowing in some way about how well they've done. And I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's wise. I do think that the more prosperous the rest of the world becomes, it won't be at our expense. The more prosperous we'll become, and the safer we'll feel, and your children will feel someday. So that's.
I like how Buffett concludes that by circling it back to safety, right? And I completely agree. This relates to the democratic peace theory that warring nations. Well, let me rephrase this. That countries that trade are less likely to war. Countries that don't trade are more likely to war. So I couldn't agree more with Warren Buffett here, and I'm grateful that he had the cojones to bring this up. And I'm sad to see that he'll be stepping down, because I personally have a belief that when people retire from something that gave them purpose in their lives, they usually go downhill very, very rapidly. So, I hate to say it, but I think that by Buffett, if he fully steps down from Berkshire, he may not be with us this time next year, which is terribly sad. Personally, I wish that he wouldn't step down, but we don't know what his health situation is. So anyway, he's a legend. And so I appreciate him standing up against this tariffs are good idea, because it's nonsense. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing to the channel. Remember, if you want to diversify away from some stock market risk, consider investing in a house hack. You could get 5% as a yield plus upside in the stock. So that way, hopefully when we IPO one day, knock on wood, the shares could be worth a whole lot more. That's my hope. Obviously, there are risks with every investment, so go check that out over at househack.com. Read the prospectuses, whatever. It's available to non-accredited investors as well. See y'all soon in the next one. Thanks so much. Goodbye.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.